Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending today's Security Industry Association webinar. We have a great program coming up today. This is Jeff Cole. I serve as SIA's Senior Director of Marketing. I'll be your host for today's webinar program. We're going to give a little bit for folks to sign in and get their streams up and running. So while we do that, I'll tell you a little bit about SIA if you don't know us. SIA, or the Security Industry Association, we're the leading trade association for global security solution providers. We have nearly 1,100 innovative member companies, and those member companies are manufacturers, systems integrators, distributors, monitoring and installing companies, commercial and residential security companies, security consultants, and a myriad businesses and organizations that are directly affiliated with this dynamic industry. So you may know us also as the premier sponsor of ISC West and ISC East. We do a lot more, obviously, providing education and certification programs, developing accredited standards, advocating for our industry, and hosting top-level events like our upcoming government summit. The SIA Gov Summit is going to be a virtual conference June 1st through 4th, and you can find information on that from our website, securityindustry.org, as well as other events, our Accelerise program for young professionals and our Securing New Ground conference for industry leaders. So if your company is not a member yet, we want you to join. Please visit our websites, again, securityindustry.org, and learn more about why your company belongs with us. Again, as folks are still signing in, 2 housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded. We will be recording today's entire program, and we'll be placing that on the SIA website. All registrants will get a notification once that's available, and I understand SecuritySpecifiers will also be sharing that on their YouTube channel. Also on today's program, we are going to be accepting questions. So got about an hour-long program today. The last 5-10 minutes will be reserved for the Q&A. So just type those in, and we'll get to as many as time will allow. So now let's get moving with today's program. I think most folks are getting signed in. Again, our topic is the prognosis for large security projects, and we're very excited to partner with our friends at SecuritySpecifiers on this topic. As Ray Colombe, the founder of SecuritySpecifiers, and I planned today's program, we knew we wanted to bring some top specifiers and consultants in to share their insights into what the industry can expect based on what they're seeing in their pipelines and projects. Obviously is impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we really wanted to create a conversation. So today's program will not bore you with a lot of PowerPoint. Instead, it's about putting the right leaders on the call and sharing that conversation with you. So to get the conversation right, we want to know who you are. And so I'm going to put up a poll. And it's now up for everyone to see. And if you would take a minute to vote and select the most appropriate answer that you can find. We know we couldn't put every organization up on there, but we'll try to get a sense of who you are, and we'll adapt our program a little bit to that. So yeah, again, go ahead and put in your vote, and then we'll close it out in a little bit and share the results. So looks like everyone's still voting. So we've got a great panel coming up today, and Ray Colombe will introduce them shortly, so stay tuned for that. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the poll, and I'm going to share the results. All right, I think everyone can see the results. And looking over here on the data sheets, about 7% of you are integrators, about half of you are developers of solutions or manufacturing of security solutions. About 27% consultants, 4% are practitioners, and about 9% of you are manufacturers reps. So thanks for sharing that. It really helps us, develop a good program for you today. So again, let me close that out, and we'll get back to the program. So Ray Colombe, the founder of SecuritySpecifiers, helped put together a great panel, and I'd now like to welcome Ray to the program to kick off today's fantastic speakers and topic. But again, before we go, remember, we will be recording this program and making it available on demand via the SIA website and on SecuritySpecifiers YouTube channel. And again, you can send us questions at any time. Ray, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thanks SIA for hosting this event. And hello to all of you out there. We've had nearly 500 registrants for this webinar, and that really is an indicator of the interest and the uncertainty that we are all experiencing right now in our security market. So before I introduce the panel, Just a couple of statistics for you to show you. As Jeff said, this is not going to be heavy on PowerPoints. It's all about the conversation. But I think it's no secret that construction activity has slowed down. And this graphic from the Engineering News Record is an indicator of that, where really the red and the orange are the most severe areas, and the blue areas are those where we haven't seen nearly as much impact, which in fact mirrors both the where the pandemic has hit the hardest, as well as local state policies to deal with that. So clearly we've seen an impact in construction. Also, I learned a long time ago that one of the leading indicators for construction are architectural firm billings. And you'll see from this graphic and the next graphic that prior to March, things were pretty strong. And then we hit a wall. And as architectural firm billings go, so does downstream construction. And it made me wonder what the impact was on security design. So many of our consultants are tied to architects and architectural activity. Here's this next graphic that I mentioned, which shows design contracts, inquiries, and billings, all fallen off a cliff in March, and presumably that carried through in April. So with that, we wanted to bring in some of the leading security consulting firms. There are a bunch of them, and so we've got 5 of them for you here today to talk about their current experiences. So with that, I'll introduce our panel, starting with Jerry Blanchard, who's the chairman and CEO of Prognosis 3, based in North Carolina. Lorna Chandler, who's the CEO of Security by Design. Lorna and her firm are based in Northern California. Brian Coulomb, there may be a relation, I won't say. Brian is the principal and director of operations with Ross and Berrezzini, specifically DVS. Charles LeBlanc with IMEG is associate principal and project executive. And Frank Pichata is the founder and president, chief cook and bottle washer from Business Protection Specialists. Charles is based in Texas, Frank is based in North Carolina, and Brian is based in Connecticut. So with that panel, as a start, I am going to, before we get into the current design activity and our panel's comments, is ask Jeff to put up another poll about what all of you out there are seeing in security projects that impact you. Whether you're a manufacturer, that would relate to shipments perhaps, for integrators, your activity day to day, for consultants, so your design activity, just to get an overall sense across the hundreds of people that we have here for what you're seeing. So I see that Jeff has that poll open, and so while we're assembling the results, I'm going to start with Jerry Blanchard. And Jeff, let me know when you have a stability on that poll, and we'll segue to that. But Jerry, tell us a little bit about your firm. You're based in Raleigh, North Carolina, but the type of activity that you have and your market specialties, if you will, please.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well in this pandemic. So Prognosis 3, our legal name is Risk Management Associates. Many of you would know us by that. We've been around 30 years. We are 16 strong, and we are able to service a lot of our customers today in all fields or all industries. We're working in pharmaceutical, high tech, banking, in all the areas. We generally don't work, but we support those. As current conditions, we've been impacted like most. We have some downturn, and anyway, that's where we're able to spin as a small company and negotiate new practices and new customers. But we are experiencing some adjustments, and that's kind of where we are.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Lorna, Security by Design is a smaller firm also. Well, Jeff, looks like you have the poll results. Are those ready?
We do. It looks like most folks have voted, so I'll read those out for those folks who are just listening in. The question was, how much impact has the pandemic had upon your projects? 5% said they'd seen positive impact. Congratulations. about 15% is in neutral impact, no impact. It's great to hear. 48% had limited negative impact, and 32% said they experienced significant negative impact.
Okay. Actually, that's a little bit more positive than I would have expected with that. So that's the good news, except for those in that 32%. So getting back to Lorna. Lorna, tell us about security by design. How big are you? Where do you specialize?
Okay. Hi. Security by Design here in California has been in business for over 40 years, and we specialize strictly in security design. So we do risk analysis, vulnerability studies, and design and engineering for physical security systems. We currently have 10 people. We're all working remotely from our homes because our area where our office is in the San Francisco area is still shelter in place. And so that's been an interesting experience. So far, business has continued, and we have managed to make the modifications within our operations to continue serving our customers, including on occasion doing field tests and things like that. So we so far haven't felt a significant impact from COVID-19, but we're hearing some mention within our customer base that they are thinking of being a bit cautious later on in the year.
Okay, and we'll talk more here just a little bit about the design impacts across all of you. Lauren, what would you say your top 3 markets are there at Security by Design?
The top markets for us are multinational, multi-site types of clients, and that's across the spectrum of industries. Because we focus on design standards so that we're nimble with respect to new capital projects, we fit well from local school districts to companies that are worldwide.
Okay, good. Thank you, Lorna. Yeah, that worldwide multinational perspective is one that when we come back to you, I'd like you to share more about if you would. Brian, Ross and Barazzini, DVS, tell us about your firm, please.
Sure. So Ross and Barazzini, which is my parent organization, is a global design and engineering firm with a number of specialties, not just security. They specialize in healthcare, higher ed, aviation, government, utilities. I mean, they're pretty well diversified. That group is based headquartered out of St. Louis, and worldwide we have, I think, over 500 employees now. My security group, DVS, which is a division of Ross and Barazzini, I'd say there's about 15 of us these days. We're also pretty well diversified in our markets. We're strong in large commercial projects, cultural projects, do a lot of education K through 12 and higher ed, government, entertainment, mission critical, which I would say includes things like data centers. Again, we're pretty well diversified, which I think has helped us weather the current storm a little bit. We're located up here in the Northeast. We've got offices in Connecticut and New York, and some of those offices have been shut down for the last couple of months. We're all working from home and all getting used to wearing headsets all day. So yeah, I think we're doing okay, but as Lorna said, and I think as we'll get into a little bit later, I think we're starting to see some clouds on the horizon for sure.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Moving on to Charles, IMEG Security Group out of Texas. Charles, tell us about IMEG.
Well, IMEG is a focused architectural, actually engineering firm. We don't do any architecture, but we do run the gamut of engineering services. And we're mostly located in the Midwest and the West. And then obviously we have our group down here in Texas that does a lot of things. The company's large, it's 1,500 of us or so, changes pretty regularly. So that's about the right attitude right now about where we stand. There's about 65, 70 of us that are actually in the technology group. And of that group, there's about 20 of us that really focus and specialize on security. And we run the gamut. We do all different kinds of industry. We're involved in all different kinds of, from healthcare to commercial to schools, whether it be higher education or K through 12. And we do a lot of government work as well. And so we kind of run the gamut. We've been pretty diversified. We haven't had to have too big of a impact so far. On our side of it, we've had an interesting case. I think we had a bit of an uptick at the beginning of all of this. I think that came maybe because of some of the things that were happening on the architectural side and maybe some adjustments that were being made because of the work at home considerations. And then it's kind of started to tail off a little bit. And I think, we might start seeing some downturn. I think the architectural side may start catching up with us here in a little bit, since a lot of the work we do is with architects.
Okay, thank you, Charles. And we're going to come back. I want to elaborate on that as well. Frank, BPS, out of the Raleigh area as well. Tell us about your firm, Frank, please.
Thank you, Ray. We are 30 years in business. Our staff of 9 is spread up and down the East Coast primarily. The services provided really split into 2 divisions, risk and regulatory on the one side and then security design on the other side. And like everybody else, our distribution of client base is pretty diversified: healthcare, higher education, K through 12, manufacturing, critical infrastructure, government, those sorts of things. And we're ready to answer the rest of the questions here, so I won't delay you moving on to those.
Okay, thank you, Frank. So really what I want to get into, because I've been surprised at what I'm about to ask all of you from speaking to many in the industry, and that is your current design activity. Because as I see it, current design activity today is the project of tomorrow. So let's talk about the stuff that you're working on now. Hopefully you all had robust pipelines going into it. Has that throttled back? Are your design sides still going strong? Are your billings still going strong? And then are you having trouble collecting money? How are your receivables going at this point? So I'm going to start at the top of the batting order, but then we'll mix it up later on. Jerry, so tell us about that design activity and then touch on billings and receivables, please.
All right. In terms of design activity, so again, we run the gamut as well. We have higher ed and those kind of things as well, government agencies and stuff in terms of the work that we do. And then looking at all of it, projects that were in the pipeline are continuing to execute. We're not seeing a lot of new work in terms of new design work coming out from the architect and engineering world at this point, but projects that were scheduled, whether it was government related or business related, those design activities up through CD development, those kind of things are continuing to move forward. We're not seeing a slowdown in that piece of it. Trying to execute is a little different now. We're doing a lot more of it remotely. So that's the aspect on the design aspect of it. And the second question was?
Well, primarily financial related. So I assume your billings mirror that, but are you seeing an impact on receivables?
So, we're doing well on the billable side at this point with design activities continuing to move forward, and we're still doing some field work as well. Not as much, but some. In terms of receivables, we have a great team of people that are in-house that manage our operation, and we're not having any receivable problems. It's normal business for us. No one's that we can tell yet is slow paying. We'll see how that moves forward during this event. I think that's some anticipation, though.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Jerry. Lorna, you touched on it before. Would you care to expand on your comments about your current design activity and then what's coming in the door, if anything, right now for you for new stuff?
Okay. Well, while we are all working from home, we're finding that business is as good or better than ever. we're working overtime to get projects out, and we've had more proposals requested than we've had in, say, the last year in the volume of requests. We're seeing this worldwide, and so our billings are actually up. Our design work is up, and so far the receivables have been steady. And while we have some clients who are talking about perhaps stepping back when they get to the interiors portions of their projects to reassess the space planning to socially distance employees on their work floors, we're not seeing a negative impact thus far.
Well, that's a great picture for security by design, Lorna. I'm happy to hear that.
It is, yes.
Brian, there at R&B DVS, what's happening there? I know because we talk maybe more frequently that I know you've been busy personally, but you know, the activity in general and the financial impact of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think first thing is there's never a good time for something like this to happen, obviously. But the fact that we were coming out of, I think, the longest bull market in history certainly helped. I mean, we came into 2020 with the largest backlog that we ever had. And so, you know, when you have a large backlog, obviously it takes a long time to work off of that backlog. And we're still feeling the effects of having so much work coming into this year. So our design side of the house has not slowed down at all. We've been just as busy as ever, which I think kind of echoes what Jerry and Lorna were saying. So on the design side, everyone's kind of frantically working to get submissions out and work overtime and do whatever it takes. And I think adjusting to this new world we live in with, you know, doing it all remotely. And I think the tools, luckily, have the technology tools that we have available to us have facilitated and enabled us to continue to work on a lot of those projects. I'd say over the 100 or so projects that we're working on at the moment, and that ranges from design all the way through to construction. I'd say maybe 5% have gone on hold in one form or another, which is certainly a lower percentage than I would have guessed if I was sitting on the outside. Those projects that have gone on hold they're either large public companies that are under extreme stock price pressure, and I think they're just kind of dealing with some of the uncertainty in the market and just saying, hey, we're going to pump the brakes on this and just kind of see where things go. And some of the other ones have been construction projects that are in New York, and so those have had to go on hold just because workers can't get on job sites. In the latter case, I think what's good news is that some of those job sites are now starting to open and things are moving again. So that's all good. So I think the good news is that the in-flight design projects have stayed in flight, and that's the best case scenario. I think if anything, we've started to see a slowdown in some proposals. I think that's probably because you have teams that are working from home and it's tough to put together RFPs and do site planning and site surveys to get new projects sort of in the works. And I think we're starting to see that slow down. I think things that were probably ready to hit the street before the pandemic hit have gone out, and we've seen some decent design contracts come in over the past couple of months, but certainly things are starting to slow down on the proposal front, and that's the best leading indicator that we have of what things are going to look like 6 or 12 months from now. And to answer your last question about the receivables, receivables have actually been fine. We've had no problems collecting cash, which is great news. It certainly does not feel like the Great Recession where you had slow pays and people holding on to cash and trying to stretch the limits of how long they could take to pay you. So we've been fortunate on that front.
Well, that's largely good news then. Other than those few clouds on the horizon, but those are understandable as well. So we're over halfway through our panelists here. Charles, is your experiencing mirroring what Jerry, Lauren, and Brian have talked about?
It generally echo. There's a couple of additional points I think to actually add to the conversation here, and a couple of details. We're starting to see a little bit more, I believe, more consulting related, less design And I think it's a little bit more focused on the consulting element of things. I think people are having questions. They're trying to figure out how to go back to work. They're trying to do things that impact us from a consulting perspective, not so much from a design perspective. It may lead to design, but that's a very common theme after you have an event just like COVID. People react, some overreact. They start asking questions. They look to leaders to come in and help them answer those questions and do things appropriately and move forward. I'm a little bit hesitant to talk about receivables, and the reason I am is we're in an industry where typically the lead time for receivables is pretty long to begin with. So it might take a little bit of time for that to start showing up, because first the architects are impacted, and then you have the owners who are paying the architects. And as consulting and designers in that profession, we're kind of at the bottom of the payment barrel. So by the time we usually see it, it's usually a ways out. So I don't know how to react to that just yet. Nothing's really changed a lot, but I'm not
Okay.
quite sure what to expect on it.
Okay. You're still getting your paycheck then.
So far, so good. Yes.
Okay, well, that's good news indeed. Frank, you're a little smaller firm here. I know that you see the impact financially, probably sooner than anybody, but you're also pretty broad based. I know you work across the country. So, what's your perspective there? Is your design work holding up relative to other parts of your business?
Yeah, surprisingly, it's the thing that's keeping us kind of going right now. When you talk about getting onto a site and doing a risk assessment and the site's closed down to visitors, you're not really going to be doing much of that. We have been able to pivot on a couple of things. We have some regulatory audit work that we do, and we've been able to do some of that remotely using technology, and that's been useful because these clients are on a cadence with the government, and they have to keep up with their audits. So that's been kind of helpful. We did launch an online training capability that's been good for people who are sitting around with not much to do right now. But the risk and regulatory side slow. The design side is fine, and we haven't seen anyone tap the brakes on any of the design projects on which we're working. Some are small, some are as big as $3 billion, and the receivables are fine. We have a staff that takes care of that.
So all of this paints a very interesting picture to me. In a way, it almost suggests sort of a double hump camel kind of curve coming out of this. We've got all this design activity happening at the moment. It's not slowing down. And those projects then, as they come out of design, will be ready for implementation. But then the new design activity, to some sense, may slow down because of the feed from the architects and just general business activity, which means that there may be a sort of a trough in there, and then it builds back up. But maybe that's just an oversimplification, because and this would be the next question, and I'm going to ask Charles to address it first. So just opinions. So now we've got this bank of designs that are being completed. You guys are doing your work, and the economy opens up. Do you think that the implementation of those designs and projects is going to be slowed at all, or do you think it's going to be pretty robust as people look to get those designs actually implemented, particularly because we've incurred some delays? What do you think about the timing of that, Charles?
I think as soon as things open back up, people are chomping at the bit to get things moving. In Texas, for example, we opened up a couple of weeks ago. I guess it'll be 2 weeks Friday. They opened up the state pretty much, and we immediately have been getting asked to show up on sites, and we've been going through whatever extra efforts to make sure that people are safe as they do that. But the construction has proceeded on as much as possible, even while things were closed. We didn't have the construction site shut down in Texas that we saw in some of the other more affected regions. And we still see that in some other places. For instance, we have a lot of work in California that's been slowed down. But for the most part, people are anxious to get started and get moving again. And I fully anticipate that once we're back to going, people are going to continue just like they are on the design side with the construction. We're kind of slow on the CA side because people, again, are trying to keep us from showing up on site and
Right.
exposing more people. But generally, we're in good shape. I would think people are going to start immediately jumping right back into the construction side of it.
Okay, so I'm going to address the same question to the rest of the panel. Lorna, why don't you take that one next, please?
Well, from our perspective, we've had a mixed bag here in California. There were a lot of construction projects that actually weren't shut down. And so they have had requirements for social distancing and things like that that's made it difficult for the integrators to do their installation because they've had to change the way they deploy their folks. But we have continued to have installation projects continuing throughout the lockdown. Our government projects have continued, and I think that what we're going to see is more cautious approaches. And if there's if there's a bounce back in COVID-19, I think that that will have a bigger impact than this first wave, because it will potentially impact economically more businesses because they'll have to potentially shut down a second time. We think that the financial sector and the high-tech sector is going to remain pretty robust because they're selling the products and services that people are using for working remotely, and helping to finance people that are needing credit while they get through all of this economic downturn. I'm thinking that a lot of people that I've talked to across the country have figured out ways to continue working. And so there may be less of a financial impact, economic impact than we all think, just because we've been able to be pretty resilient, with the exception of the retail and restaurant and entertainment industries. So time will tell. I think everybody's going to be cautious going forward for at least the next 6 to 9 months.
So far, I'm hearing that you don't anticipate that people are going to be sitting on these designs and putting them on the shelf for a while, but that the pace of implementation may get slowed just naturally due to the social distancing and those kinds of precautions. Frank, how about your design work? Do you think that when things continue to open up that they're going to go right into implementation?
I would take a bit of a counter position here on this, because I don't think that you can answer it globally like that. I think that you've got to get into a vertical specific discussion, and I think Brian hit it pretty good. The publicly traded companies are worried about their stock prices, they're worried about dividends, they're closing things down, and they're laying people off, and they're tightening the belt. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of discretionary spending in manufacturing. Next, look at local, county, and state governments. You have a freeze on tax. Sales taxes aren't being collected. Organizations like that are quickly going into massive deficits. I don't think you're going to see a lot of movement there. Healthcare, the postponement of elective surgeries is killing them financially. So the healthcare market is going to be hit. Let's look at and talk about the price of oil and gas. They're getting killed. You're going to see probably refineries closing and other things like that. I think that are going to be impacted. So there may be some areas of the country where it's good, other areas, other verticals not so good.
Okay, so you see a much stronger impact on discretionary projects, and many would argue the security projects are discretionary, despite all of our thoughts to the contrary, just because of the financial backdrop to this whole situation. Interesting. Jerry, how about you? What's your view?
I see some of the same things in that the projects that are in flight and construction moving forward. I think most of those will continue to move forward and be successful. Corporations and especially public or traded, as we've talked about, may hold back a little bit, trying to see where things are going. I think coming out of this, like a lot of other, recessions, you're going to find mergers and acquisitions taking place. You're going to find people shuffling and readjusting and adjusting their. We've learned a lot from work at home. I think we're going to see a smaller footprint in terms of some organizations. They're going to be able to readjust their physical footprint. Now, what does that mean going forward? There may be fewer new buildings being built, but I think you're going to see a lot of consolidations and new renovations and restructuring and mergers that will certainly require our services. Our services, manufacturing service, security manufacturing, security integrators, all of that's going to continue. It might be a little bumpy road for a little while. I will second what Frank said in terms of the government sectors. They get hit hard next year. We take the impact this year. They take the impact next year in terms of individuals and corporate. We're feeling the pain right now. They are working with their revenues from last year in terms of working through that and trying to hold the country up, so to speak. And they're going to feel the impact of lost revenues next year because we're not churning the economy. But I feel positive that things will adjust and we will move forward. It'll just be different.
Brian, where do you see the bright spots and those clouds on the horizon? What sectors are those coming from?
Yeah, and trying to provide some unique commentary, but I would say I, in general, agree with what Frank said. I think it's really going to be a mixed bag. On the plus side, I think the projects that we have been working on, we haven't heard anything outside of that small handful that I mentioned that are, foreseeing any sort of delay in construction. I think, there is one nice tailwind coming out of this, which is that interest rates are going to be near zero, and that definitely makes those construction loans a lot cheaper. And I think, you've got a lot of people eager to get back to work, and I think that'll be a tailwind. I think there's certain industries, as we mentioned, which are going to benefit. I think things like data centers are going to be, a really hot market coming out of this. I think we've learned a lot about capacity and, infrastructure associated with data centers, and I think there's a large hunger to continue to build on that infrastructure, because I think a lot of people aren't going to be going back to offices when this is all over. I think a lot of people have normalized working from home, and that's gonna continue. Other markets, I think, are going to be interesting to see what shakes out of this. I think on the commercial side, a lot of our commercial work is centered in major cities, and I have to wonder, is there a long-term trend against or away from major cities? Do people start going in the other direction? We had seen a trend of millennials flocking to major cities and the companies following and building new headquarters and new office buildings and skyscrapers in major cities to support all of those millennials moving in and gathering all that talent. I don't know if that change is coming out of this. There's got to be some impact. I just don't know what the percentage is going to be. So again, I think it's a mixed bag. I think certain verticals are going to do great, and I think others are going to be challenged. But to the level that they're challenged, it's really throwing spaghetti at the wall at this point.
We've got a big variable coming up this November with the 2020 election, and there's some thought that if there were a change of administration, we could be in line for a huge infrastructure program as a way to get America back to work. That's certainly a variable out there as well that could impact all of your businesses. But I think I would tend to agree with the comments about the vertical specifics, that you've got some that are really going to be hurting financially, such as hospitals and healthcare, data centers, obviously strong, retail, gaming, mixed use, all of that stuff. Could be in for some rough times here. Do you see? I know we have some geographical differences right now. New York's been hit pretty hard, Jersey, Massachusetts, and part of that is just the density of people and the density of cases, and some of that is the reflection of the type of governors that we have in those states. Do you think 6 months from now, anybody, that there will be some areas of the country that are stronger than others, or that this is just going to sort of apply across the board? What do you think about that, Frank?
I'll pass on that. I don't know. I don't know about that.
Does anybody have any feelings about any sort of geographical, ups and downs across the board?
Sure. Yeah, I think there has to be. I really do. And looking at our projects, the ones that are in New York, we were talking just this morning on one of our, all hands calls that, people are nervous about getting on the subway. It's got to have an impact about, either getting to design projects or getting to construction sites. And those are problems that, other parts of the country just aren't faced with based on the density and what it takes to get to work and how many people are crammed onto your morning commute. I think there's got to be impacts and differences in geography for sure.
Yeah, good.
I agree
I would
with
second.
that.
I would second that. I would second that. And to Lorna's point, or if there's a second wave, even if it's small, it's going to make it that much harder for those big areas to recover.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're seeing is that clients are already inquiring about ways that they can do effective screening without having things to touch. So I think there's going to be an uptick in things like facial recognition, temperature sensors that are built into devices that can sense things remotely. I think there's going to be a decrease in other types of biometrics like fingerprint readers and things like that. Anything that's going to require touching, the sanitizing issues are going to have a major impact. But in general, whether you're small or large, you have lobbies and you have to worry about who can get into your space and when. And so any of the products that deal with that are going to be doing well. Right now, we've been doing some research into that subject, and most of the products are either too manual or too expensive. And so I expect to see a bunch of integration and innovation associated with that area.
Very, very interesting. So that gets into the technology point, Lauren. I would certainly agree with the non-contact technologies. And I have to wonder too about the use of AI. We're already beginning to see some of that and some of the data mining from companies such as Brevo and OpenPath, other access control manufacturers, that leveraging that data, mining and milking that data to try to determine trends and activity, hotspots, behavior. I have to feel that's going to be that's going to elevate to the forefront as well, wouldn't you think?
Yes.
So, okay, let's shift gears a little bit here because we've got a number of types of groups here on the webinar. So for the manufacturers out there, and Jerry, why don't we start with you? What do you think manufacturers in general, who obviously want to deal with all of you, they want you to know them, know their products, ultimately specify their products. What's the best way for manufacturers to connect with you in these times where you're working remotely or you're not entertaining visitors or lunch and learns? What's effective? What works?
Well, right now, as you said, we're not able to get together. We don't have right now is questionable as whether ISC and as is may continue for this year. We'll see how that goes. I'm hoping it goes. We don't have the big get-togethers or even invitations to the office anymore. But webinars, introductions to products, having constant communications with the manufacturer reps and the different business development folks from the different organizations is helpful. Keeping us up to date as much as we can possibly stay up to date. There's a lot of, we get overwhelmed with the stuff that comes into our inboxes, and I know everyone does. We do the best we can of staying abreast of what's going on. I think that's the best things that we can do to stay in touch with each other and just try to get as much information out as possible. Realize that we can't necessarily see and understand and have a hand on every piece of technology and just move forward from there.
Charles, you gotta be getting, as Jerry said, overwhelmed with requests. And normally, I don't recommend, in the normal scheme of things, manufacturers do a bunch of webinars. You guys are too busy with clients out in the field, and it's tough to pull together people in normal times for a webinar. Of course, these aren't normal times, but now, we've got the reverse problem. Everybody's trying to get a meeting with you, do a webinar. How do you sort through all this? How do you pick those things those meetings that you take, those webinars or product intros? What's your thought process or decision process?
Well, the biggest issue for us is how do manufacturers make it easier for us? And it really starts with trust, and it always has been about trust. As consultants, we spend a lot of time in front of clients, and we do one of two things. We either use the manufacturers to help bolster us, and obviously the relationships with them are really, really helpful and beneficial for both of us in those cases. Or we spend a lot of time trying to address questions that are raised or potential issues that are raised because manufacturers go out and left field. And one of the problems we get into, and there's been a lot of alluding to this by the panel so far, is the new technology. And one of the things that's interesting about security, and one of the struggles that we have, is the biggest concern that we have to work with in security is the human interactive factor. And so the technologies are all great, but the problem is that if they don't work well with the human interaction, then they still fail. They may do wonders, but if they don't work exactly right and people can't get comfortable with them, they're going to have problems. And so what we have to make sure of is that when we vet manufacturers from our side, we try to make sure that they're not over-promising and under-providing. So whatever they're going to do will actually work. And so the way I choose to meet and work with manufacturers is, one, trust. If I do trust them, the conversations are different and they're more effective. Two, what do they do to self-police their own products? And how do they make sure that those products are well vetted and will suffice and actually work for clients? For example, one of the consulting things we're getting asked a lot now is about fever detection cameras. And people want this quick fix solution, and there's everybody out there from the manufacturer side wants to be able to say, we've got it, we can do that. And it's not near as easy a solution as everybody wants to put out there. So that's a struggle that we have. And I expect that, Lorna mentioned, no touching devices and facial recognition. Well, facial recognition has been evolving for a while, and we've all seen the struggles and the evolution of that technology, right? So those are things that are going to jump, I think, because the demand for them is going to go up. But I think we have to be very careful about how we interact with them. You can't just deploy them because somebody says we want to deploy it. It may be the latest and greatest technology, but it's up to us to make sure that our clients are prepared and understand what the implications are going to be for deploying that. And that's what I do when I meet with manufacturers, as I try to balance that desire for them to sell a product with the needs of our clients to actually successfully use and implement that product. And so that's what I think the key is for manufacturers working with me.
So for our other panelists that haven't fielded that question, is there anything that hasn't been said that you would recommend to a manufacturer to better interact with you during these times?
Yeah, Ray, I got a quick one for you. There are a lot of webinars made available, and to the extent that these can be recorded and made available later, you really can't do them all at the same time. A lot of these are happening simultaneously, so I don't see all of these getting recorded. So there's companies like BCD, Abloy, they're doing a good job as far as making these available after the fact, and you can review these in downtime. Most of us have multiple monitors sitting on our desk. A guy on this call probably has 7, but basically that gives us a chance to review those in our downtime and really kind of stay up more than we might otherwise in normal times.
Okay. Brian, Lorna, anything to add to that?
No,
No?
I agree. And, I think we have been inundated with requests. I think what would be interesting is let's focus on what can help right now, because that's what we're being asked is, hey, what solutions can you help us figure out right now to help get people back to work? And so in turn, we're trying to figure out what those technologies are. And I think, Charles made a whole lot of great points about, being able to trust certain technologies and consider putting them out in the wilds, kind of sight unseen. But that's where a lot of our focus needs to be is how do we combat this certain or this particular crisis that we're facing and get people back to work.
Okay.
And I'm agreeing with my fellow panelists that we're getting lots of requests for webinars, but if it's in the middle of a client meeting or something like that, it's not going to happen. So if the manufacturers were doing informational YouTubes and things like that that introduced the changes in their products or new innovations, and then just let us know and gave us a link and we could look at it at 10 o'clock at night or something if we needed to, that would be of more use.
Thank you, Lorna. So would any of you have any words of advice for the integrators who are on this call during these times?
From our perspective, communication remains the single most important piece. If the integrators have protocols that they have their people utilizing to address COVID-19 concerns at client sites, that would be useful to have right up front. Make sure that we have a copy and the clients for our projects have a copy. If they're responding to pre-bid, I'm sure a lot of the projects today are being having the pre-bid meetings remote, but you still have to have somebody on site. So I've had customers comment that the contractors were actually endangering their personnel by not socially distancing and having large groups in the cafeteria and things like that. So if the integrators are conscious about social distancing and masks and things like that, and making sure that everyone is fully aware of what schedules are, arriving early so that if there's a queue getting into the building, it doesn't negatively impact the project, things like that, I think will go a long way. And those integrators that do that will find that they have more projects, and the ones that don't do that will find suddenly the doors closing on them.
So that's sort of an interesting way to establish differentiation between their firm and their competition. Would any of you others care to offer words of advice or thoughts to the integrator community? Brian?
Yeah, I think about your service offerings and think about, what you can be bringing to the table to, again, help people get back to work. What are some of those new technologies out there that you can partner with consultants and engineers on piloting for your clients? People are going to have a long-term memory when it comes to this crisis, right? And even when this is over and we've got a vaccine and, life is sort of back to normal, I think in the back of everyone's mind is always going to be, well, what happens if, this happens again? Shame on us for not having some tools in the toolkit for deployment for our clients to help combat that sort of thing. And I think that comes back to, simple technology solutions. It's reducing touch points. It's frictionless access control. It's, potentially some additions to the AI arsenal. It's all of those things. So I would recommend partnering with your consultants and, think about a combined service offering for your clients that, hey, we're going to come out, we can pilot this technology, and that way you're kind of ready for the next wave or the next crisis.
That's a great point. I, throughout my time here at SecuritySpecifiers, have been really surprised at the relative lack of partnering that occurs between integrators and consultants. There are a few firms I know that do it very well, but a lot just sort of wait for the bid to come out. So there's a lot of room to run for those integrators that want to do themselves some good here. Any other comments, panel, on that? So there's a lot more that we could talk about right now, but we're running down close to our time. And Jeff, I'm sure you've been collecting some questions, correct?
We've got a lot of really good questions coming in. You want to jump to those?
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to let you pick them, and then we'll have the panelists respond to them.
Okay, Sherry, and we're not going to get to all of them, unfortunately, but a lot of great questions. One of the ones that came in was talking about, minimizing time on site during installs, and they're saying, are folks turning more to wireless technology to help do that?
We want to address that? Frank, what do you think about that?
I think that's good.
There has been a move already by contractors to go to wireless technology and using on-site wireless systems. And so there's some infrastructure being put on campuses already and in buildings to do that. It's actually required a complete change in approach for a lot of contractors because they're used to doing things at the last minute on the technology side. And it's actually kind of helping us out because it's forcing them to put some infrastructure in. And in some cases, it can be reused for the actual building structure or putting some building structure in earlier. So there are tools that are out there. One of the struggles that we have in security is just getting people to not waste time, do things, coordinate efforts so that all the trades are finished. Security gets an opportunity to actually finish their stuff and avoid pulling people on site before you're ready to have them there. I think everybody on this panel would agree. We've all been asked to go on to sites to actually test systems and do work when systems weren't even close to ready. And so I think this might actually help a little bit because it'll force the issue of people doing their homework and prep work in advance. I think that's probably one of the biggest advantages we can maybe take the opportunity to leverage in this particular event.
Okay. Thank you, Charles. Jeff, you other question?
Yes, we get a lot of questions about vertical markets. Frank, I think you kind of led that off. But some of the verticals that folks are asking about are education, both K through 12, as well as higher ed, and then also the retail, the large retailers, and what you're seeing in those three unique markets. So open that up to everyone.
So K through 12, higher ed, and retail. Okay, who wants to start with the K through 12?
I can start with K through. I mean, we've seen a good bit of activity on the proposal front for K through 12 schools, but I think certainly Frank's point earlier about small government budgets and how things are going to be constrained, that's got to play into the equation somehow here. I think we're going to have to see a slowdown to some of those renovations or new schools. It's some of that stuff is going to get kicked down the road. It has to be just based on local budgets. I've actually been surprised to see the number of school projects we continue to get asked to bid on. So it hasn't hit us yet, but I don't see any way that it couldn't.
Are you going to lay off teachers? Yeah. You can put in a security system, right? They may be confronted with that.
Yeah, Brian, we've had a similar experience where we're continuing to get requests for proposals from schools, but they tend to be more in a support role, reviewing electrical designs and things like that, helping the construction managers rather than doing a full-out design.
Higher ed.
They're looking for ways to minimize their budgets.
Higher ed. Anybody care to address or want to address the higher ed market from what you're saying?
I think I can address all of them. There's a little bit of, and I think there's a common theme to all three of these. And I think it's a common theme to basically what the essence of what Frank was saying earlier is that it's really about confidence. And the three specific areas, K through 12, higher ed, and retail, it's all about confidence. How soon will people feel comfortable reintroducing themselves in those environments with the typical densities and expectations? Another vertical is arenas and sports venues, concert venues, those kinds of things where you have a high density of people. I think those are all going to be impacted and people are going to start rethinking those. But I think it's going to take a little bit of time because I think Texas is going to be one of those first places. We're one of the first to open back up here. And so, depending on what we see for a second wave and the potential of infection, and trust me, I've seen a lot of circumstances where there's plenty of opportunity for spread of the disease because people have gone kind of overboard when they were able to finally get out of their house. But if we don't see something over the next couple of weeks with a significant uptick, I think the confidence level will start to pick up. I think a lot of the things that we've been talking about as panelists here are going to change one way or the other. We don't know how they're going to change, but I think over the course of the next few weeks, it's really going to change the status and the prognosis about what we all think about what's going to happen and at what pace it might happen.
Sure. And we'll take one more question, Jeff, but before that, I just want to say that there are a lot of questions, obviously, that we couldn't take, and we'll call those and try to derive some topics for future webinars that will resonate with all of you out there, and maybe even redoing this one 3 months from now when we have a new set of cards here that we're looking at. So stay tuned on that. Jeff, do we have time for one more question that we can address before we go?
Sure. I'll kind of group a number of questions into one, and it's really questions about, what technologies, what new technologies or emerging technologies are you being asked about or to pursue, whether that's, we've questions about robotics, things like that, as well as the thermal cameras and even technologies that might control like, social distancing or elevator spacing, things like that. Any stuff, what are you guys seeing on the technology side?
So anything that we haven't addressed, we've talked about non-contact and AI, but how about some other things now that come to mind? We'll just take it in turn.
One of the things that we're seeing an increase in is destination elevators, so that they can control who goes where more effectively and the number of people that are traveling at any one time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jerry?
The return to work strategies that people are having to look at and start to implement are, controlling traffic and those kind of things, everything from optical turnstiles to the revolving doors and those kind of things, helping that spatial distance of traffic moving through. And we've already mentioned thermal imaging and temperature or sensing. But all of those things, frictionless, are the things that we're looking at and trying to move forward on that return to work strategy.
Okay.
Mass notification,
Frank?
Go ahead, Frank.
Mass notification.
Mass notification, good one.
Mm-hmm.
I think a little bit lower tech also. I think there's going to be a rethinking of lobby designs probably. Yes. To be able to handle traffic flow and to create the positioning that we want to ultimately achieve as we start bringing people back to work. Lobbies have been traditionally designed for openness, one, but then they're also designed for high flow rates and pretty dense populations. And so I think there's a lot of those things that are going to change, especially things like employee lobbies. Public lobbies, what people are most familiar with, are pretty low dense. There's a lot of people, but they're big in open spaces. Employee lobbies are going to be one that we're probably going to start seeing a lot more rethinking here pretty soon.
Well, you would like to think this virus is not going to be with us forever, that we'll be back to normal, but maybe that argues for flexibility of design and ease of reconfiguration should something like this hit again. We may have this or something else going down the road. But anyway, Jeff, I know we're a couple minutes past time, so let me just say I'd like to thank all my panelists and you, Jeff. You're all members of the SecuritySpecifiers Advisory Board, which gives us really, really good advice. I thank you for that and for being on this. And with that, Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you for any closing comments.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Ray. And thank you, Charles, Frank, Jerry, Brian, Lorna. Thank you all for coming on today's program. And thank you everyone who attended today's program. Again, this webinar from the Security Industry Association and SecuritySpecifiers has been recorded and will be archived. And you're going to receive an email when it's available, usually within 48 hours. So again, thanks everyone, and what a great program today. This concludes today's program.
Thank you.
Okay, be safe, everyone. Okay,
take care.
Bye-bye.